There are stories that try to frighten you, and there are objects that do something worse. They stay quiet. They wait in the dark for centuries. And when the soil finally opens, they are still staring back. Not like gods, not quite like animals, not fully like us. A clay face with a reptile mouth. A painted giant, floating over a desert wall. A buried guardian, hidden inside a palace foundation. Ancient people kept records of beings that lived at the edge of the human world. Tonight you are opening 10 of the strangest. The Ubaid lizard figurines. The year is somewhere around 1919, and workmen are clearing ancient layers near the great mound of Tel Ubaid in southern Iraq. Heat folds over the mud brick ruins. Dust hangs in your mouth. Then a small figure appears in the spoil. It has a human torso, narrow shoulders, and a head that feels wrong the instant you see it. The face is long, the eyes bulge, the nose seems pinched into a snout. Some of the figurines appear female, some seem to cradle infants. A few wear belts or shoulder markings. Archaeologists eventually linked this style to the Ubaid period, deep in prehistoric Mesopotamia, long before the first cuneiform tablets. That matters, because these are not monsters written down by later priests. They are images made by people living 5,000 to 7,000 years ago. The record is frustratingly thin. Many were found broken. Some came from disturbed contexts, and prehistoric meaning does not arrive with neat captions. But the forms repeat too often to dismiss as accident. Human bodies, reptilian heads, carefully shaped hands, infants held against strange chests. Here's where it gets strange. Several examples look less like wild beasts and more like beings playing human roles. One holds a baby as if posing for a scene everyone in that society would instantly understand. Another sits with an almost ceremonial stillness, as if the posture itself carried status. Were they deities? Ancestors? Masks? Mythic teachers? A warning? No surviving Ubaid text tells us. Writing had not yet arrived in Mesopotamia when these figures were made, so the objects speak alone. Later Mesopotamian culture did imagine hybrid beings, but drawing a straight line backward would be speculation, not proof. Even so, the emotional effect is hard to shake. These figures do not look playful, they do not look decorative, they look deliberate. Their eyes are the part people remember. Rounded and forward, they seem less carved than fixed, as if the maker wanted them awake forever. When museums display them under bright light, the clay goes pale and dry. But in your mind, they belong in lamplight, half hidden in a house shrine or placed beside the dead. The unsettling question is simple. Why would a prehistoric community give such intimate human gestures to beings with clearly inhuman faces? If they were masks, why sculpt the body beneath them so carefully? If they were gods, why make them so small and domestic? If they were spirits, why show them holding children? Archaeologists usually stay cautious, and rightly so. Most descriptions call them stylized figurines with lizard-like features, not evidence of literal creatures walking ancient Iraq. That caution is part of what makes them powerful. The record says only that someone shaped these beings, fired them, kept them, and in some cases buried them. And thousands of years later, when the earth gave them back, their faces still looked like they remembered something we didn't. The dogū Jōmon, Japan. In 1886, a strange clay figure surfaced at Ibasuda in northern Japan, and it did not look like any ordinary human portrait. It had a small body, bent limbs, and enormous goggle-like eyes. Since then, thousands of dogū have been found across Jōmon sites, especially from the later phases of that long prehistoric culture. They vary wildly. Some are heart-faced, some are pregnant, some look elegant and abstract, and some, especially the so-called shikoki dogū, appear to wear heavy lenses or fitted armor. That modern nickname comes from old snow goggles once used in northern climates, and it shows the danger of looking backward with science fiction eyes. The record says these are ritual figurines. Many were broken on purpose. Many came from settlement sites rather than tombs. Some seem linked to healing, fertility, or protection. But that does not end the mystery, because the more examples you see, the stranger their design choices become. Limbs flare outward. Joints are emphasized. Bodies are patterned with bands, dots, and ridges. The eyes are not simply large. They dominate the face. In some figures, the head seems almost like a helmet. In others, the mouth is tiny, as if speech barely matters. And then it gets stranger. Dogū were not one-off curiosities. They were made across centuries by communities separated by distance, climate, and local style. Yet again and again, makers return to bodies that look altered, protected, or transformed. Some researchers see clothing, some see tattoos or scarification. Some see symbolic exaggeration tied to ritual practice. All of those readings are possible. None of them erase the emotional jolt of meeting one face to face. A human image usually invites recognition. These do something different. They seem to stand halfway between a person, a costume, and a being crossing in from somewhere else. There's also the pattern of breakage. Many dogū are intentionally snapped at the arms or legs, as though a damaged figure could carry away illness or misfortune. If that theory is right, these objects were not portraits at all. They were active things, participants in a transfer people believed was real. Imagine the final moment. A figurine is held in two hands. A wish, fear, or sickness is named. Then clay breaks with a dry pop. The body takes what the human cannot keep. Was the figure meant to represent a god, a spirit helper, a transformed human, something non-human wearing a human outline? No consensus exists. Jōmon people left no written explanation for us to consult. What remains are the figures themselves, their repeated features, and the deliberate choice to make them uncanny. The mystery is not that they look modern. The mystery is that prehistoric artists with endless options before them kept returning to a form that looks like it belonged to another category of life. The round-head beings of Tassili, not sure. The story begins with rock. High in the sandstone plateaus of southeastern Algeria, shelters preserve paintings from a greener Sahara when grasslands and lakes spread across land now ruled by wind. Local people knew of the images long before outsiders popularized them. In the 20th century, wider documentation brought global attention, especially to the strange figures of the so-called round-head phase. Some appear human enough. Others do not. Their heads swell into circles or domes. Their bodies float. Their limbs taper like smoke. A few seem enormous beside smaller human forms. One famous figure, often nicknamed the Great God of Safar, appears with a vast rounded head and an otherworldly presence. The record, however, is more cautious than the legends built around it. These are prehistoric paintings, probably spanning different moments and meanings, not a single comic book of visitors from the sky. Pigments fade. Dates are debated. Context is limited. But the sequence still unsettles. First, hunter-gatherer communities painted animals and human scenes with relative clarity. Later, in some shelters, forms emerge that are more transformed than naturalistic. Bodies expand or dissolve, heads become globes. Figures overlap as if part vision, part ceremony. Some researchers think masts may explain part of it. Others see trance imagery, ritual performance, or symbolic beings from a sacred narrative world. Those explanations fit what we know about rock art in many cultures. Yet there are details that resist easy flattening. Some beings seem to hover. Some have no ordinary facial features at all. Some loom over humans so dramatically that scale itself becomes part of the message. If these are shamans in regalia, the regalia was designed to unmake the normal body. If they are spirits, they were pictured with startling confidence. If they are myths, they were remembered visually on stone in a place meant to endure. Time did the rest. The Sahara dried. Populations moved. Meanings thinned. What remained were silent walls filled with beings whose heads are too round, too blank, and too deliberate to forget. Here is the part I find hardest to explain away emotionally. Most ancient art still feels tethered to a human viewpoint. Even when it shows gods, the scene usually gives you a ground to stand on. The roundhead paintings often take that ground away. You are not just looking at beings, you're looking at a world where the border between human, mask, ancestor, and apparition has gone soft. That may be the whole point, or it may be why these images keep getting rediscovered by each new century's fears. The unanswered question has barely changed. Why did people living in a once lush Sahara choose to preserve visions that look so little like everyday life and so much like visitation? The Lion-Man of Hohlenstein-Stadel. Winter closes over the Swabian Jura, and deep inside a cave, firelight touches ivory. You are sitting among people who know mammoths, cold, darkness, and the sound predators make beyond the shelter. In your hands is a carved figure unlike anything wandering outside. It stands upright like a person. Its face is unmistakably feline. The object we now call the Lion-Man was carved from mammoth ivory roughly 40,000 years ago, making it one of humanity's oldest known figurative hybrids. That age alone is staggering. This is not agriculture, empire, or writing. This is Ice Age Europe, and someone, with patience and skill, chose not to carve a mere human or a mere lion. They fused them. When fragments of the figure were excavated in the 20th century, reconstruction took time and debate. Piece by piece, the shape re-emerged from the cave fill. A chest, arms, legs, a head with feline features. Here's where it gets strange. Hybrid beings appear across later mythologies everywhere. But this one stands near the dawn of representational art itself, as if the human imagination reached for the not quite human almost immediately. Why? One theory says the figure may represent a powerful mythic being, something part animal, part person, part story. Another sees a ritual specialist using animal transformation as spiritual technology. Some have even asked whether gender ambiguity in the figure mattered to its role. None of that is absurd. Upper Paleolithic symbolism was almost certainly rich, and caves were not casual living rooms. But certainty evaporates quickly. No text accompanies the carving. No elder left a caption on the wall. What we have is intention frozen in ivory. The craftsmanship matters. The maker understood the human stance well enough to alter it on purpose. The lion features are not accidental flourishes. They define the being. That suggests not random fantasy, but a concept with weight. Imagine the first person outside that circle of fire seeing it, not a hunted animal, not a clan member, something between categories, holding both. To ancient eyes, that may have meant power rather than horror. To modern eyes, it often feels like a door opening too early. 40,000 years is a long time for an idea to survive, yet the Lion-Man still feels current, almost as if hybrid intelligence was waiting in the human mind before civilization itself. Was it a deity, a story being, a shamanic self, a protector of the cave? We cannot know, but we can say this much honestly. Someone living in deep prehistory believed a human form became more meaningful, not less, when the head stopped being human. That choice is older than cities. It is older than kings. It is older than most of the words we use to explain fear. And when you stand before the reconstructed figure today, the most unsettling part is not its age. It is how intentional it feels, as if the maker knew exactly what kind of being should meet you in the dark. The Olmec were-jaguar figures. Along the Gulf Coast of ancient Mexico, the Olmec left colossal heads, polished celts, altars, and the visual language still dense with unresolved meaning. Among their strangest images is a being scholars often call the were-jaguar. The label is modern. The mystery is ancient. These figures usually show an infant-like body with heavy features, almond or slanted eyes, and a downturned mouth. In some scenes, adults hold the child being as if presenting it. In others, human and jaguar traits seem fused into one supernatural form. The record says jaguars matter deeply in Olmec thought. They were apex predators, masters of night, forest, and force. Olmec art also favored transformation, where rulers, ancestors, and gods could blur through costume or sacred identity. So far, that sounds interpretable. Then you look closer. The beings do not simply wear jaguar traits like trophies. They seem born with them. Soft infant bodies carry feline mouths. Human faces note toward something older and wilder. Some theories propose a rain spirit or maize-linked supernatural child. Others see a symbolic union of human lineage and jaguar power. Older fringe stories once imagined literal cross-species legends, but evidence does not support that as history. Still, the images refuse to relax into simple allegory. There is tenderness in some scenes. Adults cradle these beings, not as monsters, but as precious presences. That tenderness makes the imagery stranger, not safer. It suggests familiarity. It suggests the audience knew what category of being they were seeing. And then it gets stranger. The motif appears across multiple Olmec sites and objects, from monumental stone to portable works. That repetition implies a central idea, not a marginal curiosity. Perhaps it marked origin stories, perhaps it described beings who mediated between storm, fertility, and rulership. Perhaps the very uncertainty is the clue. Many sacred systems do not separate human, animal, divine, and ancestral the way modern categories do. The were-jaguar may unsettle us because it belongs to a worldview more fluid than ours. But even if that is true, one problem remains. Why the child form? Why not a towering beast or clear adult hybrid? Why a vulnerable body with an impossible face? Some art historians think that vulnerability intensifies sacred potency. Others think the figure embodies a myth we can no longer reconstruct. Both may be right. When fragments of ancient meaning survive, they often preserve the outline and lose the voice. The Olmec left us that outline again and again. A small being, human enough to recognize, jaguar enough to disturb. Not a creature from a modern horror film, something more ancient and in some ways more intimate. A society put this figure in stone because it mattered. We do not know exactly what it was called, but we know people wanted it remembered. Halfway through, one quiet question lingers. Which of these would you dare to open? Tell me below. The bronze faces of Sangsingdui. In 1929, a farmer in Sichuan reportedly uncovered jade while digging a ditch. It was a small beginning for a mystery that would expand across decades. Later excavations reveal the Bronze Age culture with objects unlike anything expected from early China's central traditions. Then, in 1986, 2 sacrificial pits changed everything. Masks the size of shields emerged from the soil. Some had towering eye projections. Some bore ears like wings. One colossal bronze head seemed built to watch beyond the room containing it. The record ties Sangsingdui to the ancient Shu realm, flourishing roughly in the 2nd millennium BCE. It was real, urban, skilled, connected. Yet its art looked startlingly singular. The faces are what people remember first. Almond eyes stretch outward. Pupils swell. Brows cut sharply across serene, remote expressions. In a few examples, the eyes project forward in exaggerated cylinders, as if sight itself had been weaponized. Scholars have proposed many explanations. These may be deities, they may be stylized ancestors, they may reflect masks used in ritual performance, they may even encode elite self-presentation from a culture with visual rules still partly hidden from us. All of that stays within the evidence, and still the emotional reaction remains difficult to tame. These faces do not seem built for ordinary human conversation. They seem built for appearing. And then it gets stranger. The pits contained not random refuse, but deliberately broken and buried ritual objects. Ivory, bronzes, jades, and gold were placed in patterns suggesting ceremony, offering, or controlled destruction. So these beings were not only made, they were used. They were attired in fire and earth. New finds in the 21st century have added even more strange material, including hybrid forms and richly worked ritual objects. With every excavation, the Shu world becomes clearer. With every excavation, its imagination becomes harder to fit inside familiar boxes. Some observers see aliens. That leap says more about modern taste than Bronze Age Sichuan. Better questions are slower. Why exaggerate the eyes so radically? Why create faces that feel less like portraits than thresholds? Why bury them in ways that suggest both reverence and removal? One possibility is that the visual distortion was meant to show beings whose perception exceeded ours. Another is that the masks translated trance, myth, or lineage into metal. Or perhaps sacred art needed to be unmistakably other. If gods looked too human, maybe they would lose force. Stand close to one of these heads in a museum, and the room changes. The metal is ancient, but the gaze feels active. You do not read the face so much as submit to it for a moment. That is rare. Most artifacts become safer behind glass. These do not fully cooperate. They carry the sensation of having come from a world adjacent to ours, brilliantly organized, ritually complex, and still withholding the final explanation. Whatever the Shu intended, they left behind some of antiquity's most convincing, non-human faces, and the earth kept them hidden until we were modern enough to be unsettled by them again. The beings of the Amduat, The year is around 1422 BCE, and you are stepping into a royal tomb cut deep into the Valley of the Kings. The air is close. The painted walls glow under torchlight. Every surface seems to move. Boats slide through darkness. Serpents coil around chambers. Human-headed, jackal-headed, serpent-bodied, and knife-carrying beings line the route of the night sun. The text modern scholars call the Amduat is one of ancient Egypt's great underworld books. It maps the sun god's journey through the hours of night before rebirth at dawn. This is not random decoration. It is structured sacred knowledge, copied in royal tombs because the afterlife was imagined as a terrain with rules, dangers, and helpers. The record is wonderfully specific. Gates are named, regions are counted, beings perform tasks. Some protect, some threaten, some punish the enemies of cosmic order. Some exist in forms that seem assembled from multiple categories at once. A serpent with many heads, a human body carrying an animal face, a line of mummiform figures whose stillness feels almost mechanical. Here's where it gets strange. We often think of ancient monsters as loose myth. The Amduat presents many of its beings more like officials in a hidden bureaucracy of the universe. They have positions, functions, places, and a route no living traveler was expected to take casually. In other words, these were not campfire creatures. They belonged to a restricted map. For long stretches of Egyptian history, underworld books were royal compositions tied to kingship and tomb space. That makes the discovery experience powerful. When archaeologists entered these chambers in the modern era, they were not just finding art. They were intruding on a coded landscape meant for the dead and the divine. Some scenes are orderly, others feel almost clinically terrifying. Human-headed cobras rise from the earth. Bound enemies are decapitated or burned. Protective beings hold knives beside caverns of annihilation. The tone is calm, not sensational. That calm is what chills. Egyptian religion could place impossible beings into a system so confident that the bizarre begins to feel administrative. Perhaps that is why the images linger. They do not scream at you. They simply inform you that the universe is more populated than daylight suggests. Scholars do not treat these as sightings of literal creatures roaming the Nile. They are theological images, part text, part cosmology, part funerary technology. But theology leaves records too, and these records show an ancient civilization calmly documenting a night world filled with non-human persons. Some had names, some had jobs, some, according to the belief system, could help or destroy a soul. If you painted such beings on a tomb wall, what did you think would happen when the torches went out? Did the image remain an image, or did it become a presence once the chamber was sealed? That question belongs to belief, not proof, yet sealed places invite it. The Amduat survives because tombs were closed, hidden, and sometimes forgotten. The beings lasted in darkness longer than kingdoms do. And when the walls saw light again, the underworld looked strangely organized, strangely inhabited, and far less empty than modern people like to think. The Watchers in the Book of Enoch. Not every ancient record of strange beings comes from buried clay or painted stone. Some arrive as surviving words from traditions once considered too dangerous, too speculative, or simply too strange for the safest canon. The Book of Enoch is one of those records. Parts of it were known in antiquity, cited by some early writers, and later preserved most fully in Ethiopic tradition. Then, in the 20th century, Aramaic fragments from Qumran confirmed that major portions of Enochic literature were indeed ancient. That mattered. It meant the strange story at its center was not a late fantasy invented whole in the margins. It belonged to the thought world of Second Temple Judaism. The story says a group of heavenly beings, often called Watchers, descended to earth. They crossed a boundary. They took human women. They taught forbidden knowledge. Violence followed. Giants were born. The record is theological and apocalyptic, not journalistic. We should be clear about that. No historian treats Enoch as courtroom evidence that non-human rebels physically landed on a mountain, but the text is still an ancient record of how people imagined catastrophic contact between worlds. And then it gets stranger. The forbidden teachings are specific. Metalworking, enchantments, cosmetics, celestial signs. In the narrative, knowledge itself becomes compromised, as though certain arts arrived out of season and bent human history with them. That idea has proven incredibly durable. Across centuries, readers kept returning to the same fear. What if civilization contains gifts that were never meant to be ours? The Watchers are not vague demons in this story. They swear oaths. They descend together. Their leaders are named in surviving versions. They are punished with striking imagery of binding and judgment. In other words, the text treats them as agents in a moral catastrophe. The emotional power comes from the border violation. Heaven should have stayed separate. Earth should have remained human. The crossing produces knowledge, desire, gigantism, and ruin. Whether one reads that symbolically or literally, the structure is unforgettable. Ancient people were already telling stories in which contact with the non-human was not enlightening but corrupting. That is very different from modern fantasies of wise visitors gifting progress. In Enoch, contact destabilizes the world. Some scholars interpret the Watcher's myth as a way of explaining evil, illicit knowledge, or social disorder. Others see echoes of older Near Eastern traditions about divine beings and primeval transgression. Those approaches deepen the text rather than dismiss it. They show how ancient communities use non-human figures to think through technology, authority, and moral boundaries. Still, the narrative leaves a residue even after analysis. A mountain, a pact, names spoken in secret, skills taught too soon. If you strip away later sensationalism, what remains is still haunting. An old tradition remembered that some doors, once opened, do not simply close again. Perhaps that is why Enoch survived despite suspicion. It articulated a fear humans rarely lose, that the most dangerous stranger is not the beast outside the village, but the intelligence that offers power while breaking the order of things. As literature, it is ancient and extraordinary. As belief, it is sobering. As a record of non-human beings humans were never supposed to meet, it may be one of the clearest in all antiquity. Night settles over 1st millennium BCE Mesopotamia, and a family listens for sounds no one can see. A child is sick. The room smells of oil and clay. An amulet is hung near the bed. On it is a face you would never call comforting. Bulging eyes, bared teeth, a gaunt canine snout, talons, scales, wings. This is Pazuzu, one of the ancient Near East's most recognizable demons. Or more carefully, one of its most recognizable non-human protective threats. Because Mesopotamian religion often worked through paradox, a terrifying being could be invoked against something more terrifying still. That other threat was sometimes Lamashtu, a feared female demon associated in texts and images with attacks on pregnant women and infants. The record here is unusually rich. We have incantation texts, plaques, amulets, and ritual instructions. We know these beings were not decorative fantasies added later by modern imagination. Ancient people named them, pictured them, and used their images in domestic protection. A Lamashtu is shown with a woman's body and lion or bird traits, sometimes nursing a pig and a dog, standing on a donkey holding snakes. Pazuzu appears emaciated, hybrid, and grim, with a scorpion tail on some representations and a gaze designed to dominate. Here's where it gets strange. These images were often kept close, not in remote temples only. In homes, in intimate spaces where childbirth, fever, and fear made the invisible feel near. That tells us something profound about ancient experience. Non-human beings were not always cosmic abstractions. They were part of household risk. Scholars do not claim Pazuzu or Lamashtu were literal creatures documented by zoology. They belong to religion, magic, and social attempts to manage danger. But within that world, they were treated with remarkable specificity. Ritual texts sometimes describe how to counter one by invoking the other. The visual language is consistent enough that a small bronze head of Pazuzu can be recognized instantly across museums today. That consistency matters. It means these were durable identities, not random nightmares. Lamashtu in particular is chilling because the threat zone is so personal. She is not the devourer of armies. She is the stalker of mothers and children. Ancient fear narrows to the doorway, the cradle, the breath of the sleeping body. Then Pazuzu enters the frame, not as a hero in shining beauty, but as a greater horror kept on your side. That inversion feels almost modern. Protection does not arrive as purity. It arrives as a monster pointed in the right direction. Perhaps that is why these artifacts remain so memorable. They reveal a worldview where the human household negotiated directly with non-human forces through image, word, and ritual. The amulet was not art for art's sake. It was a barrier, a face meant to meet another face in the dark. When archaeologists unearth such objects now, the academic explanation is clear enough. Apotropaic magic. Domestic religion. Mesopotamian demonology. All true, and yet hold the object in your imagination for a second. A parent once believed this terrible little face might stand between a child and whatever hunted the night. That belief does not prove the demon, but it proves the presence of the idea with startling intimacy. Some beings in ancient records were adored. Some were mapped in the afterlife. These were invited to the bedside because something worse might already be in the room. The buried apkallu of Assyria. In the great Neo-Assyrian palaces, power did not end at the carved wall. It continued beneath the floor, inside doorways, under thresholds, and within the hidden logic of foundations. That is where some of the strangest ancient beings were placed. The apkallu are known from texts and images as wise primeval figures associated with protection and deep knowledge. In Assyrian art, some appear human, some are bird-headed, some wear fish cloaks, as if a human body has been overtaken by another skin. Reliefs from places like Nimrod show them flanking sacred trees, raising ritual buckets and cones, acting in scenes dense with symbolic force. But the most unsettling record is not on the wall. It is under it. Archaeologists and texts together reveal that small protective figures were buried in boxes or niches within palace and temple architecture. Among them were apkallu forms and related guardian beings placed where ordinary eyes were never meant to rest. The record says these deposits were apotropaic. They defended the building, they marked boundaries, they turned architecture itself into ritual armor, and then it gets stranger. Some ritual texts describe precisely where such figures should be concealed. Gateways, corners, thresholds, places of passage. In other words, the beings were not simply representations, they were stationed, hidden guardians were installed like an unseen personnel of the palace. You would walk above them and never know. The king might never see them again after dedication. Their task was to remain in darkness and keep watch. This is the part that stays with me. Many ancient cultures displayed their divine protectors openly. Assyria sometimes did that too, with colossal Lamashtu and carved genies. But these buried figures belonged to a different psychological register. They were effective precisely because they were concealed. Protection did not need admiration. It needed placement. Some apkallu traditions connect these beings to antediluvian sages, figures from a time before the flood who carried knowledge across a broken world. Later texts turn them into a bridge between primeval wisdom and human kingship. That makes their burial beneath imperial spaces feel deliberate in the deepest sense. The empire was literally built over remembered non-human intelligence. Scholars debate details of terminology, classification, and ritual sequence as they should. The evidence is specialized, and Mesopotamian religion was never simple. But the broad picture is solid. Ancient Assyrians used images of hybrid or extraordinary beings as active, hidden protectors embedded in architecture. They made objects that were never meant to be admired in daylight by passing crowds. They were made to remain unseen and effective. If there is any record on this list that fits the phrase we weren't meant to find, it is this one. Imagine lifting a stone after 2.5 millennia and finding a small figure still crouched in its assigned place. Fish cloak wrapped tight, bird face fixed forward, clay body waiting in the exact dark it was given. Not lost, coasted. What does that do to your sense of a building? A palace is no longer only walls, courts, and inscriptions. It becomes a layered organism, guarded above by spectacle and below by secrecy. The hidden beings matter because they reveal how seriously the boundary world was taken. Doors were dangerous, foundations were vulnerable. Empty corners were not empty. An empire that catalogued tribute, armies, and stars also catalogued where non-human guardians had to stand. That is not modern fantasy laid onto the past. That is the past in its own records, arranging protection through beings neither fully human nor fully beast. We can call them mythic, ritual, symbolic, or theological. All are fair. But fair words do not reduce the scene. Beneath the weight of empire in sealed compartments, ancient hands place watchers into the dark. They were never meant for public display. They were never meant for us. And yet here they are, excavated from the places meant to keep them hidden, still carrying the ancient logic that some thresholds require more than stone. From the Ubaid figurines with reptilian faces to the dogū with their impossible eyes, this list has traced a long human habit. We kept recording beings that sat just outside the ordinary body. The round-head painters gave the Sahara floating presences. The Lion Man carried hybrid imagination back into Ice Age firelight. The Olmec shaped sacred infants with jaguar mouths. Sangsing buried bronze faces that looked built for a wider vision. Egyptian tomb painters populated the night with underworld officials. Enoch remembered heavenly rebels and knowledge arriving the wrong way. Mesopotamian households hung monstrous protectors beside the vulnerable. Assyrian builders sealed guardians inside walls and thresholds. None of that proves literal creatures once walked openly through every ancient city. But it proves something just as interesting. Again and again, across continents and millennia, human beings preserve the image of intelligence that was close to us and never fully ours. Maybe these were gods, maybe spirits, maybe masks, rites, warnings, or memories transformed by story. Maybe the oldest mystery is not whether such beings existed. Maybe it is why so many cultures felt compelled to give them bodies, names, and places to stand. When you look long enough at these records, the past feels less empty and more crowded. Not crowded with proven monsters, but with structured possibilities. Ancient people did not always divide the world the way we do. Their universe had thresholds everywhere. Between human and animal, between life and death, between knowledge and transgression, between protection and terror. That may be the final uneasy lesson. The strangest things on earth are not always what our ancestors feared. Sometimes they are what our ancestors made room for across the list. One pattern repeats. The beings are rarely random. They stand at entrances, beside beds, inside tombs, above ritual pits, and in stories about knowledge crossing a line. That is important. Ancient imagination did not place the non-human at the edge of nowhere. It placed it exactly where life felt fragile. Birth, kingship. Illness, night travel, burial, storm, inheritance, thresholds made these beings necessary. A door is just wood until someone fears what passes through it. A foundation is just packed earth until a culture decides buildings can be spiritually vulnerable. A mask is just a face until it allows another kind of presence to speak. That may be why so many of these records survive in sacred or protective contexts. They were tied to the moments people least wanted to leave unguarded. And maybe that is why they still feel so alive now. Modern people often visit museums expecting distance. Instead, we find recognition hiding inside the strange. Parents feared for children, rulers feared collapse, the dead needed maps, communities wanted the dangerous unknown named, pictured, and placed where it could be managed. Even when we do not share the belief, we recognize the need. That recognition is its own kind of haunting. Perhaps the past is not whispering that monsters were real. Perhaps it is whispering that the human mind has always sensed company at the borders, not proven company, not measurable company, but imagined company powerful enough to shape art, architecture, and memory. And once a society gives that company a body, the body tends to last longer than the explanation. Clay survives, ivory survives, pigment survives, bronze survives, words survive, meaning phrase. That fraying is where mystery lives. You can feel it in the way the eyes are made. Bulging in Ubaid clay, sealed behind dogū goggles, blank in Sahara circles, focused in Sangsing bronze, watching from Pazuzu heads, fixed beneath Assyrian floors. Ancient artists knew that eyes do something a symbol alone cannot. Eyes suggest awareness. Awareness suggests presence, and presence is much harder to bury than stone. If this opened a door you want to keep exploring, subscribe and stay with me for the next descent into the forbidden edges of the ancient world. And if one image from tonight is still following you, there is another mystery waiting in the next video. Until then, keep the lights low, keep your questions close, and remember that history is often strangest where the record goes quiet.